So let me welcome back to the show. It's Thrive Thursday. Don Calloway. Last time you were here, I think we talked land grants, and Jarrod Loadholt. Last time you were here, we're talking Mississippi, water, money, and all of that. The two of you know each other. Hi, welcome, Jarrod Loadholt.
Thank you, Karen. It's good to be here. It's good to be here with Don as well. Brother Don, how are you?
Assalamu alaikum, good brother Loadholt from Orangeburg. How are you, sir?
Doing very well. Thank you.
Hilarious.
Go. Where do we start here?
Wherever you were going to say, your mouth was open.
So I just want to first say, in a universe of HBCUs, shout out to Eddie George, all love. But Eddie George don't got a lot to complain about because Tennessee State is a well-funded. As a matter of fact, Tennessee State puts the H in HBCU because they might not have a majority Black student population right now. They certainly have a majority Black residential on campus population, but Tennessee State is a massive institution, is not in a Black college conference athletically, and is a extraordinarily well-funded institution as far as Black colleges go. So he's dealing with a much greater resource base than a lot of your other HBCUs. No diss to Tennessee State, but I'm just saying Eddie George is in a pretty privileged position, so he can talk about going from, OVC to Power 5 or something like that.
So, Karen, let me jump in here because I think there are a few things we probably need to establish the foundation where I think Coach George was coming from. He was referring specifically to the issue in Tennessee is with the state of Tennessee and Tennessee State. It was discovered that they have been significantly underfunded because of a lack of a state match over decades. And so the match itself is under federal law. So federal law for what we call 1890 institutions. I think a lot of folks who call in, they know who they are. These are your land grant, agricultural research, historically Black colleges. That's the Alabama A&Ms, the Prairie View A&Ms, the South Carolina State Universities, and the Southerns, the Fort Valleys. These are large institutions in many cases. They cover and they reach a lot of students. I think Tennessee State is somewhat of an exception in terms of their enrollment, but the broader issue is that H in historically Black also meant that historically they've been underfunded by their state legislatures because the federal law requires a non-federal match for the money that is sent to these institutions. The states just weren't doing it. And so, well, not every state. Delaware, the state of Delaware, and I think the state of Maryland has actually been meeting their matches historically. So that number is 0 in terms of the underfunding. But for schools like North Carolina A&T, we're talking millions. I mean, close to billions, actually, because I think that the number that this Forbes report identified was $12.8 billion across each of your land grant HBCUs. And so I think, Tennessee State's probably in a better position than, let's say, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, but they're all underfunded to some extent by their state. And in the case of these 1890s, there's been a federal match. They just simply have not done it in many cases and met that match. Over time, you get what Eddie George is describing, which is you have capital expenditures you don't make. So that's that dorm where the air conditioning, you see it on Instagram, people are like, well, they got mold in the dorm. They got mold in the dorm because they had water damage. They weren't able to fix the water damage in time, right? Or you see they're like, oh, I'm going on campus and the student center looks the same way it looked. Well, these are all capital expenditures. And so one is the state match. Big issue, states need to fix it. And I think if they don't fix it, they need to go to court. These are things that need to happen in every state. Every single state should be doing what Tennessee is doing. And what Tennessee has done is there's been a bipartisan commission in their state legislature that said, how much have we actually underfunded this institution? Now, I'm from South Carolina. For anybody who can see the video, if you can see video, I've got a map of Orangeburg, South Carolina, my hometown, home of South Carolina State University. There's not been a case on this issue, and our legislature has not acted to do what Tennessee has done, which is identify the number, find a way to fund it. Candidly, I think the only way to get states like South Carolina to the table is to do what HBCUs in Maryland did, which was sue your state, which is what HBCUs in Mississippi did, which is sue your state. Absent, it would be great if every legislature did what Tennessee did, but they're not.
who's responsible for putting forth the lawsuit? Many of us live in these places and we don't even know where to begin. Many of us send our children to these schools and we know they're not being serviced. We know they're not getting the money. We know that the money should be there. I know during the summer of George Floyd, a lot of these schools got a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And I was tempted to give an assignment to my class to follow the money, but it was such a behemoth of for untrained journalists. But this is something that, is there a place where we can go, a database to go and follow, okay, XYZ school got this amount, where did each dollar land? Is there a place where we can go?
So the answer is no. But what we've seen, I think Tennessee is an example. We have a representative, I think his name is Love, in the legislature who did the work, where he identified this is how much money you all owe Tennessee State University because you didn't do the federal match. So one, I think it's incumbent upon every state legislative Black caucus in each of these states to do that work. That's step number one. Because one, you got to identify the damages. Before you call the lawyers, you got to say, well, how much do you owe me based on what we know the federal law to be? That's number one. Number two, to your point, Karen, it is incumbent upon the bar and members of the bar and lawyers in those states to bring those cases. Now, what Don will tell you as a former state legislator is every one of these legislatures is full of lawyers. Folks who are in many cases trial lawyers.
The Black caucuses are not always full of lawyers.
Not, but they got a few, right? They have enough.
In South Carolina, I think y'all are extraordinarily blessed. But I'm not sure that every Black caucus is full of lawyers, and that's important. But go ahead. I'll let you finish.
It has to be full, but it just needs to be somebody, right, who has the relationship to put this in front of an attorney who can actually do this work. Now, what we saw in Maryland was you got folks who came together and did. I think you had some national law firms, for example, provide pro bono legal services. So I think that's where it's incumbent upon folks like me who are at law firms. And there's some things that, we're working on in South Carolina, candidly, Karen, my home state, to bring this issue to a court sooner than it may happen, right? But I think this is the kind of thing where this is work in collaboration where lawyers who care, whether they're Black, white, or whatever, and these legislatures to do this work. Because again, very few legislatures are going to come to the table and say, you know what, y'all, we've been wrong for a very long time, and here's the money, right? It doesn't usually work out that way. You usually have to have a case and a settlement, something that forces states to come to the table because they know they've not done it. It's in a secret. They know they've not matched the funds. The last thing I'll say to this, Karen, is one of the things that you've seen states do in conditioning the match is they're like, oh, well, we want to put X dollars in for research. So if you've got this research capacity, you can get this money. Well, guess who doesn't have the shiny buildings and all of this R&D capacity to take advantages? That's one of the things you've seen in North Carolina, where if you looked at the funding disparity between the white, every state or most states have a white land grant institution, which is your moral institutions like North Carolina State, Clemson in South Carolina, Auburn in Alabama. And then there's an 1890, which are your Black HBCUs. If you look at how states have funded the predominantly white land grant institutions, you'll see a significant disparity. And what the states will say is, well, this is research and development. They do these things at North Carolina State that they don't do at A&T, and therefore that justifies this money. But you got to have money to get money. And if you never had the money, and this is how systemic racism works. It's like, hey, well, you never had the money, but hey, if you get some, you can get more. The opportunity, I think, and I'll stop here with HBCUs writ large, but I think particularly our land grant institutions, is in the CHIPS and Science Act, which you and I've talked about a little bit on this call, on this show, which is there were dollars that Senator Warnock in Georgia was instrumental in making sure these things got into this legislation that would allow institutions like the South Carolina State Universities of the world to apply for funding to expand and enhance their R&D capacity, which for a higher education institution allows you to get government contracts like the Department of Defense, National Institutes of Health. These large institutions have lots of money and lots of budget for these things, partnerships with the private sector, but it also helps you attract state funding. And ultimately, I think this is a generational opportunity for our HBCU leadership, in particular our land grants, who tend to again be larger, who have some of the infrastructure in place to take in some of this money to go after it. And so I think this is a fixable thing, but it requires a lot of collaboration. It requires some courage and some leadership, and folks kind of stepping out on faith a bit and going after what's theirs.
Go ahead, Don. Don wanted to jump in earlier. Okay. Because I'm just like, blueprints are important. And, people, again, everyone lives somewhere. And we all know, we're always like spitting into the void. Like somebody should do something. Mm-hmm. And we just hope, we shouldn't have to depend on Representative Harold Love is his name. Harold Love, I think, but there should be a Harold Love everywhere. Right. And so.
There is a Harold Love everywhere. It's a matter of priorities. And I was once a member of a legislature, and I was and still am a practicing lawyer. And I can tell you that this is not where our legislators and our lawyers' time is calibrated. And to be honest, a lot of our time and attention is calibrated at Twitter and TikTok and being an influencer and a whole bunch of other stuff. Ooh. We put it out there because I'll tell you what, we go to NBA, we have conventions, but what are we talking about? And as a substantive matter of the practice of law that can push things forward for our people. We write a lot of protest letters, but Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, they
Spotswood Robinson and Paulie Murray. Yes, come on.
Yes, they changed the world through the practice of law. What is your motion practice game looking like, right? And frankly, let's be clear, we're not asking the lawyers to take on no charity. First of all, now that the football, as you call the substantive lawsuit, the football has been established in Maryland and in Mississippi. So you have the blueprint almost to cut and paste in significant sections. And number two, I'll wrap up. The second piece is that there are significant attorney's fees here, right? While a lot of Black lawyers out there hustling traffic tickets and looking for a kid to be hit by a car, this is a generational legal fee here. So if we calibrated our time and attention properly, you could get some relief.